Thank you very much, Grant, and I'm really very thrilled to be here today presenting to you. I'm not so thrilled to be presenting after Tim, because he's a seriously tough act to follow, but we'll see how we go. So, as Grant mentioned, I come from Cape Town, and I was born there and studied my dietetics over there. Tim actually taught me in my undergraduate degree, but it wasn't nutrition, it was exercise science, so we'll let him off the hook this time. So for the last 19 years I've been living in New Zealand, and I work at AUT as a nutrition lecturer and researcher, and I'm also a private practice dietitian. And what I'm here to talk to you about today is really about, firstly, the reason as to why I changed my thoughts, why I did a 180-degree shift in my nutrition beliefs, and secondly, the response that I've had from the dietetic profession, both good and bad. So it was around 18 months ago when I removed the picture of the mainstream food pyramid and all things associated from my office wall and moved towards a more whole food dietary approach or way of eating. And in my view, it was just more aligned with how nature intended us to eat, and overall just better, more nutrient dense, and seems to work for many that take this approach. When you hear the stories today, and when you hear the stories in the books and the blogs and all the social media, you'll learn that everyone who changes their mind pretty much has a personal story. So lots of people who have been overweight or have had gut issues or hormonal issues or family history of insulin resistance and diabetes. Fortunately or unfortunately, my story is somewhat less sexy in that I have none. And that my change in theory has really been a combination of three aspects: evidence, practice, and logic. And for me, the combination of these three aspects has really been the missing piece of the puzzle as to why things are just not working for us in terms of our mainstream guidelines in relation to health outcomes. So I'm not here to talk to you today about what that evidence says, but rather just to say to you that there actually is good evidence. And this evidence doesn't necessarily come from the last few years. Some of it comes from years ago, from the 70s and from the 80s. And there is a lot more good evidence coming through. And when the dietitians talk about the fact that there's no good evidence to support this way of thinking, that's absolute nonsense. There is good evidence, and there will continue to be good evidence. The second aspect of practice, so the first thing that people typically do when they cotton onto this is to change their own dietary habits. So that's what I did. I eat LCHF, or low carb, high fat. And how did I feel? Well, no differently, because I felt pretty good beforehand. So I'm metabolically well regulated and pretty lucky. But the one difference it did make is that feeling of satiety from high fat foods, that feeling of fullness. And for me, that was the deal breaker. So the best way I can describe the feeling of satiety is just a feeling of calm. You just feel calm all the time, rather than having your breakfast, which is toast and banana and toast with a glass of juice, and then at 9 or 10 o'clock you're kind of scrambling, nervously for the next food item. So that satiety factor is something that has been helpful for me, not feeling fullness. And actually, me and my colleagues from AUT, we tested this out unintentionally yesterday on the way to Melbourne, diverted to Sydney because of the fog, and sat on an aeroplane with a bunch of sardine people for another 2.5 hours. So Auckland to Melbourne was 9.5 hours, and no food, because they'd run out. So my colleagues and I were fairly happy, really, and everyone else was climbing the walls going, "Oh, you're going to bring us some food?" And those were all the people, in my view, that were all carbohydrate eaters. I don't know, but I just suspect. Anyway, in my practice, before my shift, I was a low-fat girl, and now I'm a high-fat girl. And in terms of the outcomes that I found with my clients, with low-fat, I did achieve weight loss with my clients and increased energy, and of course considered myself a successful dietitian. And with LCHF, or low carb, high fat, whole food, I get weight loss and increased energy. So that's great. What's the difference? And the dietitians would say, there's no evidence to show that it's better. And that's very narrow-minded because you have to look beyond the actual numbers. And what we see is that with a low-fat way of doing things, it's at the expense of being incredibly hungry, and it's at the expense of doing an incredible amount of exercise to try and get that weight off and keep it off. And when people realize that that's actually not a sustainable way of going about things, their weight typically comes back. In LCHF practice, these are the things that my clients are saying to me completely unprompted. And I mean that because the first time that I told someone to put full cream milk in their fridge, I felt sick. My hair stood on end. I thought, what am I doing? But these are the things that they've come back with. Of course, satiety or feeling of fullness, improved glycemic control in my diabetics, less bloating, clearer skin, improved sleep, reduced premenstrual tension, which is good for females and males, really. Improved joint pain, less muscle soreness after exercise, which is a massive one in my athletes. And an interesting one was this one, a disappearance of an enlarged prostate issue of one of our multi-sporters who was on a trial, a ketogenic trial. He had constant problems with his prostate for years, and then went on the ketogenic diet, and his prostate issue just completely disappeared. So it's pretty amazing, these other symptoms that you get that just happen to go alongside weight loss, and that for me was very, very important message. And I know people poo-poo the N=1 experiment, but actually if we look at all the N=1s all over the world, it's pretty compelling and pretty powerful. So I took my evidence, my practice, and my healthy amount of logic, and I decided before I was going to cross over to the dark side publicly, I thought I would go back to the Code of Ethics for Dietitians in New Zealand, because I am proud to be a dietitian. Perhaps I say I thought I was proud to be a dietitian, and I didn't want to get kicked out. So I looked at the Code of Ethics, and the first paragraph in the document says that the aim of dietetic practice is to promote positive health outcomes through optimal nutrition. The dietitian is a reflective practitioner, lifelong learner, continually critiquing his or own performance and improving their standards of practice. And their first competency was that the practice of dietetics is informed by evidence and management principles. So, in fact, this is exactly what I was doing, and I really believe that I am probably more true to the ethical code than half of the dietitians who just ignore the evidence and don't want to look at it and have the conversations. Now, we're not unique in New Zealand, even though we like to think we are, but I did go through all the other codes of ethics too. So I looked at the Australian, the American, the British, and the South African one as well. And in each of those documents, it uses the words evidence-based practice or scientific management principles. So if there are any dietitians out here who think that you are doing anything wrong and think that you are breaching the code in some way, it's absolutely nonsense. How can you adopt a whole food principle set of guidelines that naturally turns out to be lower in carbohydrate and higher in fat and get amazing outcomes in practice and be considered in breach of the code? I just don't get it. So with all this knowledge, I took it upon myself to start working with the dietitians, because the dietitians are, we're an interesting bunch. Has anyone ever worked with dietitians here? Yep, you will know that we are a conservative bunch, and we like to hear the message from our own. So I started to work with them, and I guess, so what I did is I did some talks for the Dietitians New Zealand local body, and worked with the Auckland dietitian, the hospital dietitians, and got some really good feedback, which I'll show you in a little bit. But it's when I got wind of this comment, Caryn Zinn is bringing down the name of dietitians, that I found quite interesting. And what I did was I took to the infamous world of Twitter, and what I did was I tweeted something I tweeted this, and it says, "It's not me, whole food LCHF advocate, that gives the dietetic profession a bad name. It's doing it all on its own." And I attached a video that somebody had taken at the dietetic conference in 2014, so this year, of all the trade displays. So they went around and filmed all the trade displays, and all of them, so these were the sponsors, all of them were processed, packaged, food-based. And the last of the trade displays was Mars Bar. So I tweeted that out because I thought it was interesting. And I think that was one of my first tweets at Twitter, so I was a little bit nervous. And what came back was that someone came back promptly with, "What an amateurish video. I have just returned DAA 2014, Dietitians Promote Evidence-Based Practice." And that's what got me thinking about the word evidence-based, and I really think that we bandy about that word too much without really looking at what evidence-based practice is. And that's an important point that dietitians need to take under consideration. Someone else came back and said, oh no, this was me. I said, yes, amateur video, because it had lots of spelling errors, in the little statements and things, so it was. But I said, who we partner with casts doubt on our professional integrity and the credibility of our evidence. In light of the comment that I was bringing down the name of dietitians, that was ironic. And someone else came back and said, food for thought for us at DAA 2014. So someone at the conference was being nice and reflective, which was encouraging. Again, in light of the fact that I'm bringing down the name of the dietitians, I'd just like to put up a newsletter article that I saw in the Diabetes UK online newsletter earlier on this year, and it was an article for and against reducing carbohydrate for diabetics. And I'll just highlight some of the comments that the dietitian wrote. One of them was, "It is important you get at least 130 grams of carbohydrate a day to meet the brain's need for glucose. This means that it struggles to function without it." So firstly, that quantity of 130 grams, I have searched the literature and I've yet to find a reference for it, number one. Number two, we know very well that ketones can be a great fuel for the brain, so the brain doesn't only run on glucose, number two. Number three, and this is the classic one, if we really struggled, if the brain could only function on glucose and we really struggled without it, we would not have a continued species. We would have just not found food in the old days and died, and clearly that hasn't happened. So absolutely incorrect information coming from this lady who wrote the article. Second one, to stop promoting carbohydrates in the diet of people with diabetes would go against current research findings and has many potential negative effects on health. So you can see the negative effects I showed you on a couple of slides earlier. There are no negative effects. And clearly there is good quality research showing that this works. Incorrect. Third comment, with so many possible negative effects on health, it would be a mistake to move towards restricting carbohydrates without clear evidence that there are benefits of this approach. That's similar to what we've just talked about, absolutely incorrect. And lastly, by restricting carbohydrate, the diet becomes unbalanced over time and could result in vitamin and mineral deficiencies, higher blood fat levels due to higher fat intake, and kidney and bone problems from having too much protein. Okay, so there's lots wrong with this. The first thing is that if you do it properly, it is not unbalanced at all. You eat more vegetables, you get more fiber, you get more vitamins and more minerals, so that's absolute nonsense. The comment that we get higher blood fat levels due to higher fat intake is ridiculous. We do know that we get higher blood fats from carbohydrate, and we've been shown that today too. And the last point about these kidney and bone problems from having too much protein, clear indication that the dietitian doesn't know anything about LCHF because it's not a high protein diet. Totally incorrect. Yet I'm bringing down the name of the dietitians. I went back to Twitter again because I found that I had a little bit of fun on it, really. And, excuse me, I tweeted this that came from a New Zealand diabetes newsletter. And they had used this image to portray the carbohydrate-fat debate, putting across a subtle but important message to its readership that the cake in the one hand is reflective of the LCHF way of thinking, which, as you know, is complete nonsense. So using a picture like that is really misleading for people for diabetics who are reading this newsletter. The essence of the article was pretty much, there's this debate going on. If you're on medication, don't drop your carbohydrates suddenly. And then it proceeded to say, business as usual, you should eat carbohydrate with every meal, including lots of whole grains. Of course, with Twitter, you've only got a certain amount of characters, so you have to just summarize as best you can, which I did. What followed was I can only say as being a bit of a tweet bombing exercise by a young female who shared the same surname as the dietitian author that wrote the article. And it said, Caryn and Grant, read the article properly. It clearly says don't reduce suddenly if on meds. And then it says that my tweet wasn't correct. And just in case I didn't hear it the first 2 times, she tells me again. Highly inappropriate and unprofessional. So, Dietitians NZ, our local, our national body, not local body. The president of the Dietitians NZ contacted me, and she wanted to meet with me. And I know her really well and really like her, but I was still quite nervous actually. And I met with her, and she told me that some of the older practicing dietitians were really not happy with what I was doing, but the reason for the meeting was that she just wanted to see how I felt, and she wanted to see that I was well supported, and she was supporting me in my endeavours to share the message. So that absolutely made my day. I thought we were absolutely getting somewhere. And then the Third Degree documentary came on in New Zealand, which pretty much unleashed saturated fat to the New Zealand's population. And the LCHF message, and yeah, this was a complete ruckus about this in New Zealand. And Dietitians NZ put in a complaint about one of the things that I said, which was that it's important to realise that fat doesn't actually make you fat. And of course, I did that in the context of low carb, but of course, the complaint comes in. That's fine. And then I got wind of this. Caryn Zinn's not fit to be a dietitian, and that really got up my nose. So I'm part of a public health dietitians group, and they had one of their meetings. Everyone was up in arms about this Third Degree program, and the outcome of the meeting, they made four outcome statements in response to the carb-fat debate, and they were: we need to talk to universities to come up with evidence-based statements. Bonus. This debate signals to dietitians the importance of the code of ethics. Brilliant, that's exactly what I'm saying. Our approach must be evidence-based. It's not enough to look at associations. Brilliant, I'm thinking I'm actually making progress. This is I'm seriously happy. We need to come up with a position statement. So of course, I thought this is brilliant, and I was waiting for my call, of course, to contribute to the position statement, which didn't come. And then the following week, the dietitians on their website, I don't expect you to read all of that, but they put up their position statement, and they said, nutrition science is always evolving, therefore registered dietitians continually review evidence and adapt recommendations as required. And then proceeds to say that there's no substantial evidence to support this way of thinking, and it's business as usual, whole grains and low fat. So our group at the Human Potential Centre at AUT, we pretty much dropped everything for a couple of weeks, and we thought, if they can't find the evidence, we will take it to them. So we created a 55-page document, and some of it was in response to the Ministry of Health's new guidelines, which were essentially the old guidelines, and a painstaking response to the position statement of dietitians. And I sent it to all my networks. I sent to the Dietitians New Zealand database and network. So pretty much all the dietitians in New Zealand, plus a lot of other people, would have seen this. And this is the response that I got from dietitians. And I'm still waiting. But wait, there is good news. It's not all bad. So this is an example of one of the tweet messages I got from someone who might even be here today, who knows. It says, "Hi Caryn, firstly just wanted to say you are a true inspiration to dietitians, LCHF friendly like me. After all the reading I've done, I am believing more and more in this approach and currently trialing it on myself. I'm also a triathlete. Never felt better, no longer bloated, I have energy, tri performance is improving, my eczema is finally under control." And these little tweets and messages from people like dietitians go a seriously long way, and it makes you feel that you're not alone in this battle. Another one from a colleague after a talk that I did, and it says, "Hi Caryn, thanks for coming in. I personally felt quite inspired afterwards that we may have a better way of supporting some of the patients we work with who have been fighting a losing battle with their weight for many years. The topic has certainly sparked a lot of interest within the team, and for the most part I think people are now considering the concept." So I do feel that I'm making progress amongst my peers in New Zealand. This was an interesting one I got from a dietetic student. Saw you on third degree. It's great that a dietitian believes in high-fat diet. What I was wondering was, in your professional experience, do you find there is enough freedom given to individual registered dietitians in New Zealand to prescribe diets that differ significantly from the norm? I ask because I'd like to become a dietitian, but I've heard that dietitians have to stick to the script and basically prescribe what they're told to prescribe. And that makes me a bit apprehensive to get into a field where I'm basically told what to do despite what I think is right. You can imagine my response. So finally, I came across this article last week, and in a light-hearted manner, I thought I would show it. And it looks at a bunch of dietitians in the UK and their personality traits. So now I'm a dietitian as well. I'm one of them, so I'm in this too. The dietitians ranked really highly on characteristics such as responsibility, reliability, honesty, which is great. But the areas that they fell down on were as follows. The first one was novelty seeking. They had average scores in this dimension, which the trait that it indicated that they didn't really seek challenge, weren't particularly exploratory or curious. They scored really low on the dimension of self-transcendence, which indicated that they were proud people, practical and impatient. And this is an interesting one. They scored really highly on the dimension of harm avoidance, which indicated that they were an anxious bunch of people, unable to accept risk. And I thought I'd just put this up here to perhaps shed some light as to why dietitians haven't changed their mind overnight. We taught in a certain way, and I certainly haven't been taught to challenge the norm. We were just taught stuff, and that is how it was. We've got that harm avoidance dimension, and perhaps this might be some of the reasons why the dietitians are just hanging out a little bit and sometimes being a bit destructive. So, in conclusion, I would just like to say that while I think that LCHF nutrition is the way forward and is certainly the missing piece of the puzzle, I think we just need to be patient, particularly with dietitians. I think that we need to continue to do the amazing work that we're doing, and you guys need to continue to spread the message, and we just need to trust that change will come. Thank you.